My sister said I'd never be successful. Then I showed up to her wedding with the CEO she idolized and shattered her pride with power, success, and revenge. My sister had always been the golden child. From the moment we were little, she was the one praised, adored, and showered with attention. Teachers loved her, family members bragged about her, and our parents treated her as though she was destined for greatness. And me? I was the shadow, the one who supposedly didn't have potential. Every family dinner was filled with backhanded comments directed at me about my grades, my clothes, even the way I laughed. But the worst of it came from her. She never missed a chance to remind me I'd never make anything of myself. "You'll be lucky if you ever land a stable job," she once told me, smirking. "Some of us are just built for success, and some of us aren't." She always looked at me as if I was beneath her, like she was born to be admired while I was born to fade in the background. I won't lie, it hurt. More than I let on. Those words burrowed into my head late at night, echoing every time I tried and failed, every time life seemed too heavy. But something else grew inside me too, a quiet fire. If she thought I'd never succeed, then I'd build something so undeniable, so powerful, that she'd have no choice but to see me. Still, when her wedding invitation arrived, embossed in gold and smelling faintly of expensive perfume, I almost didn't go. Why subject myself to another day of being compared, of watching her glow while I stood in her shadow? But then I remembered who would be there, the guests she wanted to impress, the carefully curated image she worked so hard to protect. That's when I realized this wasn't just her wedding. It was my stage. And I wasn't coming alone. The weeks leading up to the wedding, I kept my plans quiet. I didn't tell my parents, my friends, or anyone in the family. I wanted the moment to land with full force, without a single hint of what was coming. My sister believed she had the monopoly on appearances, the perfect dress, the perfect venue, the perfect groom. But there was one thing she never expected, me walking in with the man she idolized from afar. He wasn't just anyone. He was a CEO she followed obsessively, the kind of man she'd quote during family dinners, as if she personally knew him. I remembered countless times she'd gush about him, how he was brilliant, visionary, untouchable. She kept clippings of his interviews, even saved posts about his company launches. He represented everything she wanted but couldn't reach. To her, he was the pinnacle of success. To me, he was just Michael. A man I had met years earlier at a networking event when I was still trying to prove myself in an industry where no one thought I belonged. He remembered me for my persistence, my ideas, and eventually we struck up a friendship that blossomed into something more. He wasn't just an icon in glossy magazines. He was a person who respected me for what I had built on my own, without handouts, without shortcuts. When he agreed to come as my date to the wedding, I almost laughed at how poetic it was. My sister spent years telling me I'd never matter, that I'd never succeed. And now I was about to walk into her big day with the very man she worshipped from a distance. The morning of the wedding, I looked at myself in the mirror one last time before leaving. The dress I chose was sleek, understated, powerful, not loud or desperate for attention, but impossible to ignore. I didn't want to outshine her. I wanted her to realize that I didn't need to. Because the moment we walked into that hall, holding hands, every eye turned, and my sister's perfect smile faltered. The wedding venue was like something out of a glossy lifestyle magazine, crystal chandeliers, towering white roses, and guests dressed as if they were attending a royal coronation. My sister had always dreamed of this moment, and she made sure everything screamed perfection. She wanted it to be the day where she, once again, stood above everyone else. But the moment I stepped through the entrance with Michael by my side, the energy shifted. Heads turned almost instantly, whispers rippled through the crowd, and the sound of heels clinking against marble seemed to pause mid-step. I caught the first look on my parents' faces. My mother's polite smile froze, my father's glass of champagne halted midair. They didn't recognize him at first, but the second someone whispered his name, their eyes widened in shock. Michael, the CEO, the man who had appeared on magazine covers, the one who had been invited to private panels only important people could attend, was here. With me. And then I saw her, my sister, standing near the altar in her fitted white gown, glowing under the lights. At least she had been glowing, until her gaze landed on us. Her face drained of color in a heartbeat. The smile she had practiced for months cracked, and for the first time in years, I saw her vulnerable. "Is that him?" I heard one of her bridesmaids whisper. My sister's groom looked confused, clearly unaware of what was happening. Guests started murmuring louder now, and I could practically feel the weight of their curiosity pressing against her. This was supposed to be her perfect day, but suddenly, it wasn't about her anymore. Michael leaned slightly toward me, his hand firm in mine, and whispered with a smirk, "You weren't exaggerating, were you? She really does look like she's seen a ghost." I smiled, not out of malice, but out of satisfaction. For years, she told me I'd never be anyone. And now, just by walking into her carefully constructed world, I had shattered it. The silence in the room lasted only a second, but it felt like forever. My sister's eyes darted from me to Michael, then back again, as if her brain couldn't process the scene in front of her. She tried to gather herself, straightening her shoulders and forcing a smile, but it was too late. The damage was done. Guests began approaching us almost immediately. Some of them didn't even bother with me. They went straight to Michael, shaking his hand, thanking him for being there. A few asked if he was giving a speech. One older man even stammered as he told him what an inspiration he was. And through it all, Michael never let go of my hand. He didn't act like I was just a plus one. He introduced me proudly, adding context about my work, my business, my achievements. Every time he mentioned something I had done, my sister's face twitched. She had spent years minimizing me, telling everyone I was nothing, and here was the man she idolized, praising me in front of her entire guest list. When we finally reached my parents, my mother clutched her pearls like she was in shock. You came with him?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," I replied smoothly. "Michael and I have known each other for quite some time. He insisted on being here today." Her jaw tightened, but she didn't say more. My father gave a stiff nod, the kind he used in business meetings when he didn't know how to respond. Meanwhile, my sister had walked closer, her smile still plastered on, but her eyes betrayed her. "Wow," she said, her voice high-pitched and unsteady. "You really surprised us." Michael chuckled lightly. "I wanted to be here to support her. She's remarkable, you know." The way he said it, so casual and genuine, made the room buzz even more. People glanced at my sister, then at me, then back at her again. For the first time in our lives, she wasn't the center of admiration. I was, and she hated it. Dinner was supposed to be her big showcase. The perfectly arranged tables, the carefully selected gourmet menu, the champagne tower that sparkled under the chandeliers. But instead of talking about her, everyone at our table was talking to Michael. "What's your vision for the next 5 years?" one guest asked him. "How did you know she was the right person to have by your side?" another teased, glancing between us. Michael answered each question with ease, but he always circled back to me. "Actually, she's the one with the brilliant ideas," he said at one point. "You should hear how she handled her last project. It was genius." Every compliment felt like a balm on old wounds. I sat tall, smiling politely, while my sister's face stiffened more and more. She laughed too loudly at her own jokes, tried to redirect conversations back to herself, but no one was listening. The guests were enthralled by the fact that the man she worshipped from afar had walked in on my arm. At one point, she finally snapped. She leaned across the table, her voice sharp but sweet enough to fool most people. "So, how long have you two been a thing?" Her eyes flicked between me and Michael, searching for cracks. Michael didn't even hesitate. "Long enough," he said with a small grin. Then, without warning, he leaned closer and brushed a soft kiss against my cheek. The table erupted in delighted murmurs. I caught the flicker in her eyes. Envy, rage, disbelief all rolled into one. She tried to cover it with a sip of wine, but her hands trembled as she lifted the glass. For years, she had painted me as the failure, the forgotten one. And now here I was, not only successful but celebrated in front of the very people she wanted to impress most. It was poetic justice, and it was only the beginning of the night. When the music started and couples moved to the dance floor, I stayed seated, content to watch. My sister and her new husband had their first dance, the one she had rehearsed for weeks. The lights softened, the crowd clapped, and everything should have been perfect. But then Michael leaned toward me and asked quietly, "Care to dance?" I hesitated. Part of me didn't want to feed into the storm brewing behind my sister's eyes, but when he stood and offered his hand, I took it. We walked to the center of the floor, and suddenly, half the guests shifted their attention away from the bride and groom. The band transitioned seamlessly, as if they sensed the moment. Michael twirled me gently, his hand steady at my back. It wasn't overly romantic, but it radiated confidence, connection, and ease. I could hear the whispers starting again, louder this time. "She's dancing with him. Isn't that the CEO? They look incredible together." My sister's perfect smile cracked again. I caught her glare as we spun past her, her jaw tight enough to break glass. Her husband whispered something in her ear, but she didn't respond. Her eyes stayed locked on me, burning. Michael leaned down just enough for only me to hear. "I think she's close to losing it," he said softly, almost amused. And he was right. By the time the song ended, my sister's composure was hanging by a thread. She practically dragged her groom off the floor, whispering harshly, though she pretended to laugh for the cameras. I should have felt guilty. But instead, I felt lighter than I had in years. For once, I wasn't shrinking in her shadow. I was standing fully in my own light. And the night wasn't over yet. The speeches came next. Her best friend gushed about her beauty and grace, her new husband gave a charming toast about their perfect love, and my parents, of course, praised her as though she'd single-handedly reinvented marriage. I sat quietly, smiling politely, but I noticed something. Every few minutes, someone's eyes drifted toward me and Michael. Guests whispered, glasses clinked nervously, and even the photographer seemed torn about where to focus his lens. Then, to my surprise, the host of the evening tapped the mic. "We'd also love to hear a few words from the bride's sister." My heart pounded, but I didn't flinch. This was the moment I hadn't planned for, but had silently wished might happen. Slowly I stood. Michael gave my hand a reassuring squeeze before I stepped up to the microphone. I looked around at the sea of expectant faces. "I'll keep it short," I began. "My sister and I have had our differences. She's always been the star, the one people looked up to. And I was the one standing a little further back." A ripple of awkward laughter moved through the room. My sister's smile tightened, frozen in place. "But the thing about being in the background," I continued, my voice steady, "is that you learn to fight harder, to prove yourself in silence, and to never give up. And tonight I stand here proud, not because of who I came with, not because of what anyone thinks of me, but because I know I've built a life worth celebrating." Applause broke out, warm and genuine. Michael was the first to stand, clapping with a proud smile. The admiration in the room was undeniable, and for the first time, I was at the center of it. Meanwhile, my sister sat stiffly at her table, her knuckles white around her champagne glass. She had wanted me invisible tonight. Instead, I had become unforgettable. After my speech, I returned to the table, my pulse still racing. Michael leaned in and whispered, "You handled that brilliantly. No one could have said it better." His words grounded me, reminding me that the night wasn't just about my sister, it was about me finally stepping into my own story. But my sister wasn't done. As dessert was being served, she suddenly stood and clinked her glass. "I'd like to say something," she announced, her voice tight, but sugar-sweet. The room hushed. "I'm so happy to see my sister here tonight," she began, her eyes darting toward me with that full warmth I knew too well. "She's finally found someone to accompany her. It must feel good, after all these years, to be noticed." The jab was sharp, wrapped in polite tones, but the crowd shifted uncomfortably. A few guests glanced at Michael, as if waiting for his reaction. He didn't disappoint. Michael rose slowly, his presence commanding silence. "You're right," he said evenly. "It does feel good. But let me be clear, she was never invisible. Not to me, not to anyone who took the time to see her. If anything, the world has been slow to catch up to her brilliance." The applause that followed was thunderous. Guests clapped, some even stood. I felt my throat tighten as heat spread through my chest, not from embarrassment, but from vindication. My sister froze, her smile twitching as if it might shatter. She tried to laugh, tried to wave it off, but it was clear. She had lost control of her own wedding narrative. And for once, I wasn't just surviving her cruelty. I was rising above it. By the time the cake was brought out, the tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. My sister stood beside her new husband, posing for photos with that brittle smile glued to her face. But her eyes, those betrayed everything. Every glance she threw my way was sharp, filled with the rage of someone watching their spotlight slip away. I stayed calm, sipping champagne, chatting with guests who seemed far more interested in me than in the endless photo ops. Michael was effortlessly charming, and the more he highlighted my achievements, the more the narrative shifted. People weren't whispering about the bride anymore, they were whispering about me. Finally, when it was time for the couple's toast, my sister tried one last desperate attempt to reclaim the room. She raised her glass and said, "To family, the ones who support you and the ones who teach you lessons." Her eyes locked on me, a cruel glimmer behind the fake smile. The jab was obvious. But before I could even react, Michael lifted his glass as well. "To family indeed," he said, his voice steady but firm. "Especially to those who prove everyone wrong by succeeding on their own terms." The crowd erupted in cheers, clinking glasses, laughing, agreeing. My sister's attempt to humiliate me had backfired spectacularly. In that moment, standing there in the glow of the chandeliers, I realized something. I no longer needed her approval. I no longer needed to prove myself to the family who doubted me. I had already won, not by crushing her, but by building a life that spoke louder than her words ever could. Still, watching her seethe on what was supposed to be her perfect day, I couldn't deny the satisfaction. As the night drew to a close, I slipped outside with Michael for a breath of fresh air. The cool night breeze carried the muffled sounds of music and laughter from inside, but out here it was quiet, calm. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of comparison, judgment, and ridicule fall away. Michael looked at me, his eyes soft in the glow of the garden lights. "You know," he said, "you didn't just show up tonight. You arrived, and everyone saw it." I smiled, not out of pride or vengeance, but out of relief. He was right. Tonight hadn't been about stealing my sister's spotlight. It had been about stepping into my own. I had walked into the very place where I had been dismissed for so long, and instead of shrinking, I had risen. Inside, I could still imagine my sister trying to patch up her perfect image, pretending none of it had shaken her. But I knew better. For the first time in her life, she had been forced to see me, not as the background character she always wanted me to be, but as an equal. Or maybe even more. As Michael took my hand, and we started walking toward the car, I glanced back one last time at the glowing hall. The music swelled, the lights glittered, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered every word she had ever said, every time she told me I would never succeed. And I realized I didn't need her validation. I never had. Because the best revenge isn't loud. It's simply living a life they told you was impossible, right in front of their eyes.